Hello, and welcome to the Brown Initiative for Discipleship and Evangelism. I'm Ethan Brown, and this is B.I.D.E. This video is being produced in connection with the partnership program at the Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. So if you're already one of my partners, thank you very much. If you're not and you're interested in learning about that program, I'll put a link for it in the description below. In this video, I want to talk with you just a little bit about the name B.I.D.E, the Brown Initiative for Discipleship and Evangelism, and why I've chosen that name for this podcast. So if you're going to go with me on this journey, and if you're going to be a regular viewer of this podcast, well, I want you to understand at the outset what the goals are and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So B.I.D.E, what is it? Well, the Brown part of the Brown Initiative for Discipleship and Evangelism is just my last name. And the reason I picked that is because I'm the one doing this. I'm making these in connection to a season of really intensive study in my life, where I'm really digging deep into the ideas of discipleship and evangelism and the revitalization of churches in their mission. So the Brown Initiative is, I guess, because I'm the one doing this. And as I'm doing all this work, it's really having a deep impact on me. I'm finding real changes in my life. And I don't want to hoard those changes. In the chances that it might bless somebody else in their efforts to be a disciple-making evangelist as well, then I want to share it. I want this to be disseminated and for other people to be able to have access to what's happening in me, because I think I'm enjoying what's happening. Initiative. Why did I call it an initiative? I thought about several different names like institute or center, but initiative seemed to me to be the most accurate to what I'm trying to do. When you take initiative, you're trying to initiate something, get it started, get it going. You take responsibility for trying to help something happen. Well, the truth is, I see a problem in the North American church, at least, and perhaps the church in the West more broadly, even than our own country. And that is that the world underneath us has changed. It has shifted significantly when we weren't looking. And as a result, we are feeling less and less competent and less confident in our ability to reach our own nation and the nations beyond with the gospel. I think for a lot of Christians, the good news that Jesus is King is increasingly becoming difficult to see the significance of. How is that relevant to life in the world that's full of the internet and iPhones and the kind of challenges that we're having, the shifting metaphysics and beliefs about anthropology? What is a human being? What is that? Are we mostly what biology makes us? Mostly what our mind is? Somewhere in between that? What are we? And the gospel in the middle of that conversation is taking a beating. And as a result, a lot of our evangelistic efforts are kind of suffering. What I want to do in the Brown Initiative is to be part of a solution, not just critique the church for the struggles that we're having, and not just complain about the problems that we're facing, but encourage real and effective evangelism in the world that we find ourselves in. So that's my purpose in the Brown Initiative. The last two words in the Brown Initiative are discipleship and evangelism. And those are the two things that I kind of want most of the focus of this video to be about, because I think they're the most important part of the name B.I.D.E. So when we talk about discipleship, what are we talking about? Well, discipleship, as I understand it, is a relational process of encouraging one another to become attentive to the way of life found in Jesus Christ. Multiple people, at least two, coming together and sharing their insights of what they have seen in the life of Jesus. It's encouraging obedience to the teachings of Jesus. And it's about practicing the life of spirituality and a life of obedience to the King who is Jesus Christ. So when we practice discipleship, what we do, generally, there's someone who's maybe a little further down the road than the other people involved. And there's at least one other person involved. Now, is that necessary? Well, no, I don't think it is. Two people who have a Bible and are both dedicated and are filled with the Spirit can lead each other. And you don't have to necessarily be one person further down the road acting as coach and director. That's just typical. That's the way it most often happens. Now, it's important that the coach sees themselves, I think, as a coach. You're not there to have any power or authority, but you're there to encourage the performance of the others, the other person or the other people that you're there with. So you don't control their life. You don't tell them what to do. There may be some critique, but even that is limited. Your goal as coach is to push the other people to pay attention to Jesus. And what the entire group is doing together is paying attention to Jesus together. Ultimately, the goal is to lead to Christian maturity. And what Christian maturity looks like is modeled in the life of Jesus. So that discipleship's goal is that a person becomes mature, and maturity is measured by the tendency of pouring life into other people, becoming attentive to the well-being of others. I say that based on the discipleship model put in front of us in the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Matthew, although I will suggest all four of them will put this in front of you. But Matthew is very systematic in how he does it. And what Matthew's goal overall is to show you a way of leading people through a changed way of understanding God and into ministry, and ultimately to become the kind of person who goes out and repeats what Jesus has done with them, so that the 11 surviving apostles are commissioned at the end of the Gospel of Matthew and told, what I did with you, you go do with other people. I made you to be disciples. Now you go make disciples of me among all the nations. And remember, I'm with you the whole time. That's my understanding of discipleship, is that it is a growth and development structure where you lead people to become obedient to Jesus and then to grow in the way of Jesus. What is evangelism? Well, evangelism is presenting the good news that Jesus is the long prophesied, saving, rescuing King who came to save his people from their sins and to rescue the whole world by becoming the King of Kings, the King of all the nations. That really unlikely biblical story that this tiny little nation should eventually give birth to the King who is also God. And he would reign over all of the nations of the earth, drawing from all of the peoples a people for himself, one unified people. So evangelism is announcing that great, cosmic, huge story that Jesus is the saving King. But the goal of evangelism is to make disciples. Evangelism, when properly done, is about leading people to believe that Jesus is in fact King of Kings and then therefore King of their life, and that they should give their lives to him as well, and that they should then live in obedience and grow in obedience through a process of discipleship. Now, you might notice almost immediately that evangelism leads to discipleship. So, why is it in B.I.D.E, in the name that I'm explaining right now, it's discipleship and evangelism? Wouldn't it make more sense to make it B.I.D.E and have it be evangelism and discipleship? Well, the reason I chose that isn't just because it makes an easier to pronounce acronym. The reason that I chose discipleship and evangelism is because I think these things are so intricately linked that they really don't ever need to be separated. That the goal of discipleship is evangelism, and the goal of evangelism is discipleship. I think there's actually a very good reason to place discipleship before evangelism. Actually, there are several reasons. The first reason is that that's the way that Jesus did it. Jesus didn't begin with evangelism as his starting point. He began calling disciples and training disciples to become evangelists. When you look at the Gospels, Jesus does engage in what I guess you might call evangelism, in that he was kind of a big revivalist preacher. He would go out and the Judaism of his day was an empty, broken thing. It was sad. It was beaten down. Their own self-understanding is so connected to kingship that God's goal was an independent kingdom that would be the kingdom of God on the earth. And the king that they've got, a guy named Herod, is kind of a broken, non-Jewish, blasphemous mess. And not only that, they're so oppressed and pushed down by foreign kings. Jesus comes as an entirely different kind of king. And yes, he does preach a revitalizing message to Jews. He's definitely doing that. But I think he's preparing the Judaism of his day to receive the ministry of his disciples. He's getting the world ready. He's plowing the ground for them. But his real work, his main work, the primary focus of his work in the Gospels are those disciples. Jesus pours himself into 12 guys, and he ends up keeping 11 of them, that's pretty impressive. Now, he had other people. Clearly, there were others beyond those 12 guys, because they were able to replace Judas when he went off the rails. But Jesus's approach is part of the reason I'm starting with discipleship, not evangelism. His main goal is to build these 12 people to the point where they could do reproducing ministry. Another reason is a problem that I see in modern Christianity, and that is the problem of making converts that aren't really interested in being disciples. And here, the problem has to do, I think, with the way we present the gospel. We have a lot of churches, maybe it's not your church, but there are a lot of churches where if you unleash the church to go do ministry, it wanders off the leash, rolls over, and goes to sleep. Disciples don't do that, but converts do. I think that real conversion to Christianity involves taking Jesus on as king and wanting to learn everything that you can about him. But the way that we present the gospel, that's not always the focus. In fact, most of the time, the way that we present the gospel, the focus is on saving souls. I will suggest to you that the problem here has to do with misaligned goals. And I think they're coming from a good place, but I think they're having disastrous effects upon Christianity generally, and specifically in areas of discipleship and evangelism. We have made the goal of evangelism getting people out of hell and into heaven. Now, that's not a bad goal, but if that becomes the big picture of evangelism, then what we will do is produce converts whose big focus in their own hearts and minds is on being saved and staying safe. Their goal won't be really to grow because we didn't tell them that that's necessary. We told them that God has a wonderful plan for their life, and that's been interrupted by sin, but that Jesus died to save them from sin and they can go to heaven when they die. That is one approach to sharing the gospel that is salvation focused. And it's a very, in my opinion, it's a pretty broken way of sharing the gospel. The kingship of Jesus doesn't really come in very much. But the kingship of Jesus is the whole central focus of the gospel. Being a person who belongs to Jesus is at the heart of real evangelism. Leading people to be that is at the heart of real evangelism. That's what the offer really is. It has the fruit of salvation, but the offer is, come join with Jesus. Well, when you have that misaligned goal, then you produce misaligned converts. People that don't see discipleship as a necessary element of their conversion and salvation, but as a nice tack on if they choose to be involved with it. Now, the resulting trouble that connects to this approach to evangelism is that we rapidly load up churches with underdeveloped Christians. People who are experiencing discipleship only through the kind of standard a few times a week meetings. The discipleship requirements are really, really low, and the expectation for change or transformation are almost non-existent. You're changed enough when you decided to become a Christian, and you're going to live there. But what that produces, those assumptions, and they are assumptions. If you critique them, they fall apart. But what those assumptions produce are churches that are full of very immature Christians. Immature in a whole lot of ways. They certainly don't have the definition of maturity that I offered earlier, which is seeing maturity as being like Christ in that you live for the sake of others, that you have a for the sake of otherness about your mindset, the way that Jesus did. He lived his life for other people. He didn't live for himself. He wasn't even born for himself. He didn't have to do any of this for himself. But he was born, lived, died, and was raised again, not for his own sake, but for the sake of others. A fully mature Christian takes on that mindset. But how are we producing that? Well, if your evangelism gets them into worshiping communities, that's better than not that. But not a lot better than not that. We need to be thinking, how are we going to produce fully alive Christians? When I say not a lot better than not that, the problems of church are myriad, aren't they? There's so much trouble in the church. But just think with me for a second. How much of that trouble arises from underdeveloped, non-discipled Christians? People who are committed to Jesus in their hearts. They truly believe that he is their Savior and they want a relationship with him. But they aren't really thriving or growing. That doesn't mean they're not doing anything, though. Think of the number of church fights that arise out of the profound selfishness of underdeveloped Christians. People that want to worship God with their song. I want my song sung. Don't you dare sing that other song. I hate that song. And if you sing those songs, I'm not coming to church. Or they want their color of carpet. Or the poster that gets hung in the lobby, it offends them and they get mad and they stomp off. These kinds of behaviors are way too common in churches. The demand my own way, willing to fight over the Prince of Peace, Bible studies that break down into ugly arguments that we talk about after the study is over with our allies about how awful that other person's behavior was. Now, I will tell you, that's part of discipleship. It really is. When I look at the Gospels, the disciples are growing, but especially in the Gospel of Mark, the disciples are pretty rough. Their behavior can be pretty embarrassing. But a disciple who is fully mature and fully grown is going to be able to step into those problems with love, grace, and mercy and help people through them. And also, it is the disciple who is fully mature and fully grown who's going to be your most effective evangelist, because they have developed a mindset that says, not only are my fellow Christians my responsibility, I'm here to love them, but so is the world. God so loves this world that I need to be about this. And I'm going to invite people who aren't walking with Christ at all, or are walking in stumbling ways with Christ. Maybe they're a convert, but they're not a disciple. I'm going to go and evangelize that person with a better gospel. And I'm going to lead them more deeply into the kingship of Jesus. And I'm going to walk with them and help them to grow to the point where they want to do that too. That is called reproducibility, where you end up with a disciple who makes disciples and ultimately sees as their goal leading the people who are now disciples of Jesus, not merely converts, but also disciples of Jesus, leading those people to grow until they reach maturity. And in maturity, and as a mature person, they also want to pour their lives into others, helping those others to become disciples. And the goal is to make disciples who make disciples, who make disciples, and so on. Now, in a way, that's the goal of all true evangelism, right? It's to lead people into a committed relationship with Jesus Christ. It's to sit with somebody, paying attention to Jesus for the sake of that other person, and leading that person to become attentive to Jesus as well. That's the goal of real discipleship and real evangelism. Do you see how they're linked? The reason in B.I.D.E. I have put discipleship, I've said discipleship should take priority over evangelism, is because I think that if you do it that way, you'll get both together. If you make discipleship a priority, discipleship will ultimately lead to evangelism. But if you make evangelism the priority, it may or may not lead to discipleship. And non-discipled converts aren't generally very motivated to do evangelism. Let's face it, evangelism is threatening, it's hard, it's scary. We can only do it because Jesus is with us. He gives us the courage and the strength to go do that stuff. So if we have grown as a disciple to the point where, okay, my life's about pouring out into others, then I'll have the interior strength and spirituality, the connection by the Holy Spirit to Jesus Christ, to have the courage to do this stuff. But if I've been led by one person who does have the courage to do this stuff into sitting in a pew and not growing, the chances that I will become someone who does the work of an evangelist is incredibly low. So I believe discipleship precedes evangelism. Aim at discipleship, you'll get evangelism. Aim at evangelism, you might get discipleship. But history suggests probably not. I want us to be disciples who lead other people to become disciples of Jesus. I want to be a disciple of Jesus that helps people become disciples of Jesus. And I think that's really the goal of all discipleship and of all evangelism. And we do this because God so loved the world that he sent Jesus. And Jesus sent us for the honor of Christ and for the life of